I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West.
So of course, I texted you the other day and I was like, hey, have you watched Ted Lasso? And what was your response?
Duh.
And it was a duh. And I totally like deserve that because of course you watched it because it's your humor. It's like, it really embodies you in so many ways. It's bright, it's humorous.
Well, to me, I was like, that is like the greatest compliment that anyone could give me because I think it's such a delightful show. I know people might be like, why are Nikki and Pete talking about Ted Lasso? Well, I mean, but it's a show, and if you haven't watched it, highly recommend. I'm obsessed with that show. But it's a lot about like human condition, mental health, and actually optimism.
Yeah.
But not about perfectionism, right? Like that's what I say.
Yes.
That's what I love about it. It's not about like a fairy tale. It's about like connection and love and friendship and all in the space of like life is painful.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and that, we mess up performance. And of course, Dr. Sharon Fieldstone, she gives a good,
great. One of the best. I mean, one of the great psychologist characters on TV.
Yeah, so it's a sports psychologist character. And so actually, we had discussed possibly doing like just a media one, but there are like researchers that study, just like the role of psychology in media. So we're not going to do that today. We're going to break down maybe a little bit. We will not, no trigger warnings here. We're not going to ruin any kind of the content of the show, right?
I think you mean
spoiler alerts.
Spoiler alerts.
Well, same thing.
We don't do trigger warnings either, but no spoiler alerts. We won't give away any of the important plot points
we don't.
that aren't sort of out in the world about. Yes.
Wait. So why did you start watching it? Because of course, as a sports psychologist, I watched it. But what drew you to Ted Lasso?
Oh, I started, well, because it just like I would say most people, and by the way, just side note, most Americans, do you know that it's not very popular in the UK, which is so fascinating. I read an article with with the guy that plays Jamie Tart, and he tells his friends in the UK, like, I swear I'm famous in America. I swear I'm famous in America. Which anyway, so I started like most Americans watching it when it came out in the pandemic. So it was like, it was kind of like, it was sort of like a sleeper hit. And, it was one,
yeah.
Obviously in the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, life seems to just be watching shows now.
Yes.
So that's when, and I was that's how I started watching it. And I think maybe the first season was already done. Like I watched it right after and I binged the whole thing. And I just thought it was such a delight. Yeah. You just started watching it, right?
Well, actually, as we're currently recording, I have not finished it yet because it's like I'm savoring the last few bites. I think which any of us that have binged, we know that maybe when we get towards the end, we savor a little bit and we don't want to rush too much to the finish line. And I love, of course, I love that you went to Ted Lasso during the pandemic and I went to Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, which was like as dark and scary as possible.
I also watched that as well. I watched that as well, but
that messed with me.
I like all the spectrum of human experience.
You do, because those are on totally opposite ends, aren't they?
Yeah. Yep. Well, so what? I think it's important, because we could obviously just talk about how much we like the show, but I don't think that'll be that helpful.
Yeah.
So I mentioned a couple of the the themes like I think that show up, which is there's mental health, there's optimism, there's like love, connection, friendship, even like the space of pain. I don't know. Is that sort of your sense of themes of the show as well, or are there other things that I'm not identifying here?
There's the performance side. So like I think any kind of any like sport fan obviously loves it just for that reason, and just like the cleverness of like him not understanding that why it was called football, and because of the America versus the European approach to it. It's funny because whenever I have Europeans, they're like, "This is football." It's like, I know. It's like the real. I think in the World Cup this past year, they like what they call it, like the first football or the real football. There's like an advertisement.
Oh, I don't know, but it's true. I feel very American of us to, of course, come up with a different name that the rest of the world, 99% of the world doesn't call it that, but we got to call it soccer. So those are totally. So those are some of the it's like the cute, funny, like
Yeah.
quirks of life.
But
Okay. Yeah.
and then the deep side of like diversity, I think it really
Yes.
tackles multiculturalism and diversity in a way that was and I think it's just really smart. There's an episode where he is given like a pep talk, and it's all of like Allen Iverson, which for any NBA fan,
Yes.
which I think is a thing. There's probably a name for that in like in writing, in like script writing, where they're like using like previously written stuff in. I don't know. You're smart. I feel like you know that stuff.
Yes, now I'm just going to be, yeah, I mean, it's a device, I would say.
Yeah,
It's like a device,
yeah,
a
yeah,
device. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that that's also clever because which of course I'm not clever enough that I never realized it. It took me to see the TikTok on it to realize that's what they did. Thank goodness there's smart people out there doing this stuff.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
so I think like, I mean, and again, the part when I say like the deeper, so we were saying the deeper stuff, I think the
Yeah.
thing that I'm curious about, or like why we want to talk about this, is like there's, I think it's very difficult a lot of times to communicate these concepts of, like I said, like optimism,
Yeah.
connection, um, with humor, while also sort of not being presenting things in a like fantasy way, or like
Yeah.
even like you're saying diversity.
Yeah.
And it is very, I don't know, I think why it spoke to a lot of people is there's like a universality in terms of like,
Totally.
what do humans want and need, and how do we navigate, like a messy world with different opinions and different people. And I like a
Yeah.
sport. It's funny because it's not, I would say, people maybe disagree. It's like, it's not really a sports show. That's the thing. It's like the sport,
100%.
like the team is the device. That's the thing. And
It's
it's like,
exactly.
and by the way, and I love to use sports like analogies in therapy, because it's just like you have people that are different with
Yeah.
different backgrounds and like
Yeah.
strengths and limitations, and like how do you work together, and like what do you really, and it's like even with sports, it's like they'll talk about the show. It's not really about the winning and losing. Winning and losing is a part of it, but it's
Yeah.
like you'll win some, you lose some. Like what is this
Life.
really about? It's about connection. It's
Wait,
about
so
life,
what do you love about Dr. Fieldstone from your perspective, as a non-sports psychologist?
Well, I would say, well, a couple things, because I think what I really like about her is the character is like, first and foremost, she is, there's like how do I want to say it? Like, there's like a confidence in
Yeah.
what and how she does things. Like I was reading about this the other day. I think they sort of like are careful with this, because there's certain like a certain character trope, like the Black therapist, which
Yeah.
can be very problematic on TV,
Yeah.
right? Where it's sort of like this idea of like, the Black therapist is sort of doing all the caretaking of white
Yeah.
characters, and
Yeah.
not and sort of not actually seen as a whole person, as a whole
Yeah.
individual.
Yeah. Assertive.
And so
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, and I think they're sort of like, it's sort of like a person who's like being, yeah, it's just like giving wisdom, but
That's
not,
right.
there's not making room for holes, and they don't do that in the show, which I really
No.
like. Like Dr. Fieldstone is a whole person,
Yeah.
and she is
She's quick. She's witty. She's funny.
she's
She's
quick, she's witty.
assertive.
Yeah, but she's assertive. She's also very but she's very human. Like
Very
she's just
caring.
yeah, they don't they but also but like imperfect too.
Yes.
Like they show
Yes.
like where there's not a sort of like putting her on a pedestal, or
Yeah.
making her like a two-dimensional version of a human. And anyway, I don't know. I think and I think the way that she interacts with the patients are like, it's very like, I'm like, that's a good, like, I'm like, that's how my colleagues talk to patients. Like,
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. One of my favorite segments of the show happens in the third season, where, and this won't spoil anything, but he says, you want me to be truthful, but there you are billing a billable hour and only give me 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Which
Yes.
for the listeners, if you tune into our episode on private practice, that might make some sense to you. But that's funny, because
Yes.
for us as psychologists, we know that there's the 45-minute billable hour. Yeah.
Right. Well, no, and what he also says is that he says basically, you don't, like, something to the effect of like, you don't care, you're just getting paid, you don't
That's
really
right.
care about me. And then she says, you're a coach, you get paid, do you not care about your players? She
That's
said,
right. Oh,
you
good
make a
one. Yeah.
salary. That's
Yeah.
what she says. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so anyway, so I think, yeah, she's just a really
Yeah.
accurate portrayal of what a psychologist is like a really good not just a sports psychologist, just any psychologist, you know.
I know. Well, and to be clear, I called you a non-sports psychologist earlier, and I'll take that back because as I came off my tongue, everyone we're all psychologists, we're mental health providers, and so you don't have to be any of the things to work with the sports team. But I love that you said that, because the team, it's just a device. It doesn't represent football. It just represents
right.
Differences, people coming together, working for a common good, going through struggles, being the underdog, and learning, to come together and build cohesion, so that to then, start kind of working as a stronger unit together.
Yeah. And I think there's also like, and again, like what the show does. And I think that if you're somebody who, I don't know, if you're a listener of our podcast and, we get into like these, Pete and I can, we can really go there in terms of some of these like more complex or difficult existential concepts. I think a show like this does a really nice job at actually connecting to those while also simultaneously staying really, really rooted in the lightness of being a human and the humor part, right? I think there's also like sometimes, when shows want to, or books, anything, want to address like the really deep, painful things about being a person, it's hard to also balance that with like, there's all like being a person's also like funny, being a person's also like kind of weird, like, this, and the show really like dances between those, I think, in a way that's really effective.
Yeah, and it's like you were the East part of this today, because that's very Eastern of you. I think that's exactly what because it is about diffusing, from identity, and so it's about, and life is really silly, and life is, we create. Look, life is suffering. That's what you learn in the East, so that when you're suffering, you're not alone. Everyone's suffering together. And so, check out our description if you haven't seen Ted Lasso yet, we put in a link there, but otherwise just know that, that this is the reality of what we're doing. But sometimes it's okay to escape that and binge on some show just like Ted Lasso.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.